And today we will be covering, today we will be covering Napoleon Bonaparte. We'll talk about his early years. We'll talk about some of his domestic reforms, what he did inside France. Most famous things like the Napoleonic Code. We'll talk about also his agreement with the Catholic Church. And we'll talk about his relationship or limitation of the women's right. That's something that came up in the last stream, that some people felt like that Napoleon is the one that took away the rights of women, and I was kind of like pushing back on that topic, saying that they didn't get they were not advanced as much during the French Revolution. But that's kind of those things if we talk later on during the stream that might give you a complexity point if you're going for that in LAQ or DBQ. And finally, we'll talk about Napoleonic Wars and how Napoleon was involved in mastering the art of fighting. So definitely, if you want to think of Napoleon, two main topics is probably Napoleon the leader, domestic reforms, all the changes he made in France, and foreign affairs, the things that he created outside of France, spreading nationalism and being also a great military commander. As far as the key concept is, you might have known if your teacher already told you in the beginning of the year, there's a key concept outline for each AP exam that tells us what will be in the exam. So from the key concept this year, what we're seeing that they want us to focus on how Napoleon Bonaparte imposed his nationalistic viewpoint all across Europe. So basically Napoleon and the spread of nationalism and the French Revolution ideals across Europe. That's one point number one. Also, talking about how the facade that he supposedly created a new form of government, but in the end it was some form of dictatorship, his brilliance in military tactics all across Europe, and the nationalistic response that he created all across Europe. That's the key concept that we want to think about Napoleon coming to the exam or writing an essay about it. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. One of the most famous thing that a lot of people, there's actually a poll question here in the bottom that you might see who's the most famous or most influential French person in French history. And Napoleon, a lot of times in most poll, comes in number one. But interestingly enough, he might have come number one as the most famous French person in French history, but he was actually, spoiler alert, not French at all. Napoleon was not born in France, actually was not able to master French spelling for most of his life, and still spoke with what we say more of an Italian accent. So he was born in Corsica, which is an island off of Italy. So could be the most famous French person in French history was actually from Corsica. Actually grew up hating France. He grew up in a class family. A lot of people say Napoleon was born poor. He wasn't exactly poor. He came from a minor noble family with some connection. One of his uncle was a cardinal. His father was a representative to court and a successful lawyer. But Corsica got occupied by France, so he grew up under basically French occupation and hated France. But his father basically took the opportunity to send him and his brother to the French military school. And Napoleon was considered very withdrawn in school, did not have any friends, didn't talk too much to other students, but he basically took the opportunity of the French Revolution. So we might have not talking about Napoleon Bonaparte in this stream. There would not be a Napoleon Bonaparte if it wasn't for the French Revolution. The French Revolution gave opportunity for talented people to get promoted in the army, minus the fact that many officers got killed in the French Revolution. So there are a lot of openings, if you will. And he basically got the nickname the Little Corporal and basically took advantage of the French Revolution. And at the age of 24, he basically helped to capture the city of Toulon in France. And that basically propelled him to get promoted to a lower general. So that's how Napoleon basically started up from an upstart, what some people call an upstart, from a small place in Corsica to becoming a general at the age of 24. So what skills that he had that basically separated from the rest? Paul Johnson and many historians actually give that he was a genius in map reading, that he knew how to calculate speed, how long it will take him to move his troops from one location to the next, and he had a very, very good reading of the land with his soldiers. So one of the first assignment that he got command of, he got command to go to Italy, which again was considered like a horrible campaign. But to the surprise of everyone, in 1796 to 1797, he managed to basically conquer most of northern Italy, and basically found that the soldiers basically loved him. That's one of the key of the success of Napoleon, that the soldiers really, really were loyal to him. He was very good in giving speeches. I put a quotation of one of his famous speeches in the campaign saying, "Soldiers, you're almost naked and ill-fed. The government owes much and cannot pay you, but I will lead you to the most fertile plain in the world. Rich and provinces and great towns will fall into your hands, and in them you will find honor, glory, and riches. Soldiers, do you like courage and steadfastness?" So it's really interesting that, like, he had these act for like basically telling his soldiers, you barely have any food and you're like poor and destitute, but if you follow me, like, I'm going to make you rich. So he did actually, and at least in the beginning, make a lot of his soldiers very, very rich by the fact that he basically stole a lot of stuff from many, many cities that he came into, and basically made an agreement with his soldiers, that whatever places that we will conquer, you can send some of that loot back home. So there was motivation from the soldiers that they will make some money and not be poor, but there also motivation that that he's going to be a successful general leading them all across. Did he go to Italy because Italy was under Austria and the French declare war on Austria? Yes, so it was connected, of course, to the fact that there was a fight. Basically, to recap from the last stream that we talked about, in the last stream we talked about that basically France, during the French Revolution, basically found itself declaring war earlier on in Austria and Prussia. Prussia and Austria invaded France, and in the early years they repulsed and pushed them back. And many other Europeans were worried about the French Revolution and the French Revolution idea spreading over. So there was an idea of maybe conquering territories from Italy to punish Austria, taking territories from them, and also maybe, trying to move other European nations against Austria. So that was a part of the idea, but nobody expected them to be successful in gaining territories. He turned out to be like an amazing general, what he managed to achieve in such a short time, conquering so much land in Italy. That blew everyone's socks off. So great point and comment. Next up, he talked about or envisioned an idea of conquering England. England was considered always like the biggest problem in France, but navy was a big problem that he never managed to muster a great navy to fight the English. So the next best idea they came up with is maybe going to Egypt. If you go to Egypt, maybe you will hurt England, cutting off their trade routes, and maybe attacking, trying to find basically way to attack their trade routes to India, things like that. So that was the next thing that they came about. And he also figured, like, could be a great, that's something he was very, very interested in history. So like the idea of like going into Egypt really, really fascinated him, and he brought some scholars with him. And of course, they discovered the Rosetta Stone. Anyone knows what the Rosetta Stone is? In the chat room? So what did the Rosetta Stone help us discover? Yeah, one. So yeah, 3 languages. So basically, what it helped us. I don't have the image here. So what it helped us figure it out, there's 3 languages in it, basically. Yeah, Greek, Egyptian. So hieroglyphics, we did not know how to read ancient Egyptian writings, but because it was three separate three different texts, that's how we managed to break that code. So that was a very successful thing. And the French also later took it back to France, but then later on it got looted, and I think now the English have it in the British Museum. But that's a whole other story. While he was actually very successful in conquering parts of modern-day Israel and conquering Egypt, by the way, one thing that he forgot was his navy behind what he was doing, the land invasion, and his navy was completely destroyed by Admiral Nelson. So there's one thing: Napoleon was always successful in all the battles. One thing that that France lacked was a good navy, and always the English managed to defeat them in that capacity. So Napoleon had success in conquering Egypt. There was not too much resistance of him conquering Egypt, claiming that he was going to transform it, finding a lot of historical artifacts like the Rosetta Stone. But in the end of the day, it was a disaster because his navy was destroyed. But then some people were saying things are changing in France. There's an opportunity for him. So in 1799, he's left his army. That's going to be once on two occasions. He's basically going to drop his army and head back to France for his own political leader. So loved his soldiers, loyal to his soldiers, but left them behind and moved back to France, which leads us to 1799 to what is called a coup or coup d'etat. In 1799, there was an opportunity to take over the government, and that's what he thought about doing and was involved in that. So again, just to recap in French history, we talked about the French Revolution started in 1789 in the last reign. We talked about how they had a liberal phase, there was a radical phase, the Reign of Terror for almost an entire year. 50,000 people got executed by the guillotine. And basically the last 5 years, from maybe 1794 to 1799, France was ruled by a directory of five, a body of five men on the head of that. And there was a lot of frustration with this body. So Napoleon thought about starting a coup, taking over the government. He organized it with another prominent French leader, Abdication. If you might have studied him, that's the guy who wrote the famous essay, What is the Third Estate? Abdication, by the way, underestimated that Napoleon would actually become a full-blown dictator, but that's a whole other story. So in 1799, Napoleon staged a coup and taking over the government. By the way, it wasn't a smooth coup. It wasn't just coming into the parliament and just taking over. They just expected parliament to vote in favor of him taking over. He entered the chamber. He wanted to start speaking, but everyone started to scream that basically like that he's trying to take over and throw things at him. He didn't even utter one word. He actually left. He felt like he basically messed up his coup and it was not working for him. But it's funny, actually, his younger brother, Lucien, basically came back with him into the chamber and did this dramatic. Napoleon also had some talented brothers, not all, but some. His brother actually took him to the stage and took a sword in front of the audience and basically said, I swear to you, like, if my brother will become a dictator, I will take this sword and stab him in the heart. He just showed an example, and they really, really were shocked by that explanation, and they took him on his word. So they said, fine, we will allow him to be a leader. Also helped that there were some soldiers brought into the rooms, and later on they voted for the creation of the Consul, a 3-member body, and Napoleon proclaimed himself first consul. So that's how basically Napoleon took power over France. Basically, we're transitioning from a directorate to a 3-member directorate called the consulate, kind of like going into Roman time. And eventually, Napoleon will kick out the other 2 consul and make himself consul, and then later consul for life. So there's a lot of borrowing things from Rome. Really, did they work together? So what was unhappy about with the directory? Well, again, first of all, France is still fighting foreign wars. There's inflation. The economy is not doing that great. The ideals of the revolution are not being fulfilled. So there's a lot of corruption of the people on the top. So the directory was some sort of a dictatorship that nobody was really happy from it. They were just happy that the reign of terror was over. But for test purposes, they're not. I don't think they're going to ask you anything about the Directory, so you shouldn't worry about that. Probably more reign of terror, liberal phase, and Napoleon. That's why I'm not spending too much time about it. So yeah, Napoleon basically used the other two council and basically became a lead. In 1802, he basically proclaimed himself consul for life. And then in 1804, he proclaimed himself the Emperor of France. So that's a point that some people basically claim is the end of the French Revolution. That's another complexity point. Is he the end of the French Revolution? He's spreading the French Revolution ideas to other places, but he's still a dictator. So in 1804, as far as a lot of people are concerned, France executed a king, and basically we're leaning maybe 15 years later, and we have now an emperor. So replacing a king and an emperor. And again, the terminology is Napoleon is really leaning back to a lot of Roman times. So the term consul or the term emperor, it's kind of like Roman names. So it's kind of like a facade of like we're like the Roman Empire, but in reality, he's a full-blown dictator. But to bring more legitimacy to his claim, he actually brings the Pope himself to France to crown him in a very elaborate ceremony. Interestingly enough, by the way, when the Pope came over, Napoleon was going to be crowned with his wife, Josephine, and the Pope was shocked that they had like a civil service ceremony. So they were not like legally married by the church. So the Pope was very, very angry and said, like, I will not do the ceremony. So they had to be married by a cardinal. And then after that, the Pope said, yes, I will now crown you. But Napoleon had his revenge in the ceremony itself. The ceremony itself, as you can see over here, we can see the Pope over here looking very, very angry. Napoleon basically first made him wait for like a couple of hours, just sitting there until he finally show up in the ceremony. And then Napoleon, instead of having the Pope putting the crown on top of his head, Napoleon walked all the way, took the crown and put it on his head himself. And then he crowned Josephine, his wife, as empress. She, by the way, complained for a few hours afterward that the crown is so heavy. So you see, nobody's happy. So anyways, so the coronation of Napoleon, here we have a famous painting by Jacques-Louis David, who is a very famous neoclassical painter. In case you missed that stream, go back to the previous stream. If you get a subscription with Fiveable, you can see the replays and watch my previous stream about the French Revolution and neoclassical art. Probably the most famous painter you need to know for neoclassicism is Jacques-Louis David, who was a painter during the French Revolution and also was a painter during Napoleonic age. So he's a very, very important painter, kind of painting what is going on in France from executions of kings and queens to the coronation of Napoleon. So Napoleon, to summarize, is crown emperor of France. Any questions up till now? All right, so let's continue. So we're going to talk about two aspects today in this stream. We're going to talk about, okay, we're doing good. We're going to talk about two aspects of Napoleon's reign. We're going to talk about his domestic reforms, and we're going to talk about his foreign affairs, what he did inside France and what he did outside of France. So inside of France, what Napoleon did, if we can chalk it up to the positive things that he created, he decided basically to kind of reorganize government and the army and put in place what we will call today a meritocracy, or a merit system, that people are basically going to be promoted based upon skill, not necessarily based upon family connections. And that's one explanation why the French army was so successful under his leadership. More officers, skilled officers were picked for the job, like he got promoted, and not necessarily people were just based upon family connection. He also tried to centralize the government and was successful to some extent. He also created a more organized bureaucratic system, trying to pick more capable people, same thing that he did in his army. But not to think that France now is becoming like a liberal state, even though he's very, very good in organizing the state. This is still basically a full-blown dictatorship, if you will. And like any famous dictatorship throughout history, and again, if you get an essay of continuity and change, there's still basically like any dictatorship going back to the Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, and so forth. There's always going to be a secret police that is going to monitor anyone who spoke against the government, might find himself being fined or ending up in jail. And the head of the secret police, Joseph Foucault, basically worked during the entire reign of Napoleon, and some people were sometimes even assassinated just on suspicion. Suspicion enough was enough to kill people. So sometimes there was not even evidence or a due process going on. And sometimes they just like to assassinate people just to basically to send the message of like, don't even think about it. So we have to remember, with all the glorification that some people give Napoleon, you have to remember that he's still a full-blown dictator. He's a very complex personality, but his reign is a full-blown dictatorship. Now, censorship is another example, if we want to compare, that he restricted the freedom of the press. And basically all the newspapers, like during the French Revolution, we had a lot of pamphlets, a lot of writings going on, and basically like newspapers in France basically shrank. Like Paris only had like 4 newspapers, and everything that got published basically had to be scrutinized by the government, and anything that was like a little bit negative basically got erased. So hence the term censorship. Other important domestic reforms that he's creating a central bank. It's hard to imagine that France managed to function this long without a bank. That kind of explained why they got into the financial disaster to start with. He created a new tax system. Napoleon really, really liked to think of himself like a big brain person that can solve all the problems. He would just sit and work hours upon hours thinking like, what else? What's next? What's next? Like that he really thought that he was destined for greatness and he can solve everything. So he created a new tax system, a new sewer system, and he allowed some noble families to get back into France. So that's kind of like we're talking about Napoleon to some extent saying the revolution is over when he takes power, but he's also saying, I am the revolution. So if there's a famous quotation, if you want to talk about what's going on with the revolution, he's the end of the revolution. He basically saying, the revolution is over and I am the revolution. I embody the revolution. I will transform France and spread our ideas. Okay, so basically reinventing everything. He's going to allow nobles to come back to France. Nothing to worry about that. But the nobility institution is over. Another institution that he is allowing back to France is the Catholic Church. If you recall, during the French Revolution, and remember what happened in France during the French Revolution with regard to the Catholic Church? Anyone? What happened to the Catholic Church during the French Revolution? Yes, civil constitution. Very well, very good. So the civil constitution we're talking about, the civil constitution, again, there was a whole basically, the clergy had to basically swear allegiance to the state. So no more connection. The Catholic Church basically was kicked out. And also during the Reign of Terror, they eliminated religion completely and created this kind of like whole thing about worshiping knowledge and like elevating people like Marat and Rousseau into God. So changing street names, no more saints, and all these sort of things. Basically canceling holidays. So France basically in the Reign of Terror basically eliminated religion to a certain extent. And Napoleon, now that he is in control, interestingly enough, he is not a religious person, not really interested in religion, but understands the pivotal role that religion plays in society. So that's why he negotiates a treaty with the Pope and signs with them the Concordat of 1801. Concordat, if you see that term, it appears in other years. It basically means a treaty between the state and the papacy. Yeah, the clergy had to declare loyalty, cult of reason. Yes, all these sort of things happened during the French Revolution before that. So getting back to it, the agreement basically says that the Pope is going to renounce all of his claim over the land, but he's allowed to nominate a bishop, and he also has the power to depose them. But the agreement was very, very beneficial to Napoleon, because some people saw him as kind of like this upstart, a usurper that came out of nowhere, not even French, taking over. So he's another dictator that has no legitimacy. Remember, he has no noble background or nothing, but to some extent now having the legitimacy of the Pope, the coronation from the Pope, and also signing an agreement with the Catholic Church, that's going to get a lot more Catholic on his side. So basically, he brings Catholicism back into France and declares it the religion of the majority of the Frenchmen. But it's not the official state religion. So Napoleon basically not personally interested too much in faith, but using it for his own, for giving legitimacy to his reign. Other things that he created in France that, again, it's a lot of the stuff, by the way, we're mentioning is still exists to this day. So the legacy of Napoleon, some stuff still exists to this day. Another thing that he creates in 1802 is the Legion of Honor, and kind of like rewarded for an exceptional performance of mainly soldiers, but also public servants. So it's kind of like today we have that, like that was actually adopted, like what we have here in America, like, the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and all these sort of decorations. So he started that, and that's something that other countries really, really picked. And again, Napoleon had a showmanship for these things. He understood soldiers, and he fought with soldiers. So there's like a famous story that he came to a battalion in the middle of battle while they were resting and saying, who is the most bravest soldier in this battalion? And somebody mentioned like this guy over here. So Napoleon came over and took his own start that he had, the Legion of Honor, and just like put it on that soldier chest. So just imagine how that made soldiers feel that their emperor and the leader of their army, comes over and gives them that personal attention. And that's the two aspects of Napoleon, the diplomat Napoleon and the soldier Napoleon. That's an example how the soldier Napoleon won over his soldiers. Also in 1803, the famous Louisiana Purchase, anyone taking a push next year, also Napoleon sold the Louisiana territory, which he grabbed from France and sold it to the Americans for $15 million. So Napoleon is involved in domestic affairs, but he's also doing stuff outside of France. Another things that he's creating, and again, lasting legacy to this day, he reforms the education system in France, which is the same reforms that is still going on to this day. So he creates, a new state-run system. It's called lycées, and that's basically a high school education. So a lot of countries started to create basically elementary education. So he moves up and created a lycée, which is a system for talented students from the ages of 10, 16. And again, the idea was that these people with this higher education or high school education, will later advance the country and become the future leader of the government, the future leaders of the army. And in those schools, of course, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on patriotism and nationalism, learning a lot of things about French history, modern literature, science, and so forth. And there was also some form of scholarship. So people who financially could not afford to get into these school de lycées, the government would sponsor these sort of things. So again, these are the sort of things that really help popularize Napoleon to the regular population. Another big transformation that Napoleon doing is what is called the Napoleonic Code. By the way, a lot of things he liked to stick his name on top of it, being an egocentric, of course. France had a very, very confused law system, so he wanted to codify it and put everything in one place. So he carried in the Napoleon Code in 1804. But basically, the laws are a collection of laws that governing property and the civil procedures of things and so forth. It's kind of like also replacing kind of the discriminatory system that you had between the nobles and the local population. And by the way, the French Revolution had a lot of ideals about equalities and the rights of men and so forth, things like the Declaration of the Rights of Men. But none of these things, when you end the French Revolution, none of these things were codified in law. None of them were put on the books. They sometimes wrote constitution, but many constitutions got replaced and repealed. So now Napoleon wants to put in place recognition of the equality of all French citizens. So one example, again, if you might get a short answer question in the test, like give an example, let's say, of one group of people that for the first time were recognized as French citizens. Anyone can give us one example of a group, let's say in France during that time, that might get finally recognition as being citizen of France? Who do you think in France might become, let's say, for the first time citizen? Anyone? All right, so one example is blacks. No, it's interestingly enough, there will actually talk about there was a revolution in Haiti during that time, but they were not, that was a complicated issue because of slavery that got canceled. Jews, for example, there were not very, very few that lived during that time. Yes, so Jews, for example, the first, if you want, first example of European Jews to get full citizenship is the emancipation of the Jews in France. So now they're equal citizens, so that let's say they can serve in the army. They have all the basic rights. So that's one example if you want to look at Napoleon as giving them for the first time. I don't know about gypsies. I don't think so. I'm not sure about gypsies. That's a good point. Might have to look into that. You see, there's always question or always names that might pop onto that. So basically, like, again, it's very clear today that, you know, any person in front of the court will have some rights or legal procedure. But in those days, if you were working class and middle class, have a case against a noble person, the noble person word will be above you. So Napoleonic Code created a situation that you have equality in front of the law, kind of to safeguard that two people can go into a court. It's not necessarily if you're rich, automatically you're going to win the case. So that's the sort of things. Now, on the flip side, if there's one group that did not enjoy the Napoleonic Code, will find a lot of discrimination in it, is women. And that goes into a very complex issues that have been written a lot about, what exactly went on with women and what the Napoleon exactly did. So women in all, if you want to generalize, basically had no political rights during the reign of Napoleon. That's like point number one, if you want to start from that. Did they have some gains during the French Revolution? Very little. Many of the French women who spoke up during the French Revolution, like Olympia de Gouges, got executed. There were very few women clubs that emerged during the French Revolution, but there was some sense maybe women are progressing a little bit. Maybe women started to talk about maybe there's going to be a Declaration of Rights of Women. So whatever women little progress that they felt that they had, or maybe that they will get something in this new set of laws, Napoleon basically codified that all their gains, whatever gains they felt they had, they're not going to get any of them. And it was firmly established in the Napoleonic Code that you can read it. It's a fascinating document that husband have complete control over their wife, that husband control all the property, loans, sale of property. Women find it very, very difficult to obtain a divorce versus men, that is very, very easy for them to get it. like a woman cannot make a will without a husband. So you might get a document, let's say in the test, or if you get a short answer question about like a group, that suffered more under Napoleon. So Napoleon is a great essay question for complexity. There's people who gain stuff during his reign, and there are people who are losing. Why was he a jerk to women? That's a great question. He had a very fascinating relationship with women. Could be, he wrote so many letters to his wife, talking about feelings and emotions and like relationship. A lot of time people were like, like his letters are so like, a lot of time, by the way, his letters are in like love books and love poems. Every time you open it up, it's Byron and then Napoleon. It's like Napoleon, people. I'm like, yes, he was like a sucker to one extent to women, like all that I have is you. By the way, during the Italian campaign, when he went to Italy, his wife Josephine had an affair with an officer, and she didn't come to the line. So he wrote all these letters like, please come visit me, please, I love you, all these things for like months. She didn't come to him. So he said, I'm like going to leave Italy and return back home. So finally the directory sent her back to Italy so she will stay with him. When he returned to France and everyone told him about the affair, he went upstairs and he locked himself into a room for like 2 days and said, I never want to see you again. And she like stood by the door and said, I'm so sorry and everything. So yeah, Napoleon had the, he had like a very, very fascinating personality with women and stuff like that. Eventually got divorced, but he always had a big love for her. Anyway, Napoleon and women, that's a whole, that's an amazing story in itself, by the way. And by the way, another fascinating story, there's so many stories about Napoleon. None of them are in the test, but we don't need to be productive all the time. Some of the love letters that he wrote to her about her affairs and stuff. Sometime one of this was on ships, and the British caught these letters and they published it in the newspaper, so everyone can hear about Napoleon relationship and sobbing. So yeah, that was like, imagine reading that back in 1805. So that's another fascinating story. All right, let's talk about another aspect. So we talked about Napoleonic reform. So let's talk about Napoleonic Wars. Probably most people know him as one of the greatest generals in history. That's what he's famous for. This is another famous painting here of David, heroic Napoleon on the horse. It's not really a very realistic painting, but it's a lot of propaganda. So basically, throughout his leadership, there were like almost 7 separate coalitions of European nations mastering to fight against Napoleon. And amazingly enough, Napoleon managed to defeat almost all of these great coalitions, being outnumbered time after time. They probably will not ask you about all the major battles, or you don't need to know about the big coalition, but we can just a quick overview. Basically, in 1802, he defeated the second coalition and basically took away Italy. Third coalition, he had that's when Britain, Austria, Russia, and Sweden went against them, managed to defeat all of them. Probably his biggest victory, he's known for his Austerlitz, when the Allies like outnumber him 2-1, and he was very, very successful. What key thing we might want to remember for all of this fighting, basically, HRE stands for, anyone? What great empire did he dissolve? Anyone knows? Holy Roman. Okay, so he dissolved the Holy Roman Empire. So if you study, of course, you study the AP Europe about the Holy Roman Empire, Charles V, the Habsburg, all this great powerful empire. So basically, once and for all, after 1805, his great victory in Austerlitz, basically march into Austria and basically finish the Holy Roman Empire. That empire is gone, and basically the creation of Austria, or later on, it's going to be the Austria-Hungarian Empire. So there were lasting effects to his great success. So he conquered basically almost all of Western Europe was under his control. The only country he was not able, that he wanted to conquer, was basically England. So he had control over so many European states, and basically he took his siblings and basically started to put each one of his siblings as a monarch to country. Like took one brother, made him the King of Holland, took one sibling, made him Queen of like territories in Italy, and so forth. So that's where you get the term nepotism, which refers to either getting a position based upon family connection. There's dispute of nepotism comes from the term nephew, or some people say it comes from derived from the word Napoleon. It's like family connection getting the job. So that's one of these sort of things. So basically, Napoleon was very, very successful in defeating all of his opponents, but his one country he was not successful in defeating, and that was England. England had a great advantage over him that he was never able to take over, and that's the fact that they just had a better navy with him. So once he understood that he militarily cannot defeat them, the next best thing he decided to do is basically put a blockade on them, or what is known as the Continental System, basically saying all of the European nations that I've conquered and made treaties with, you are not allowed to trade with England. And that really didn't work out too well for him. They managed to smuggle things into it. He didn't have a great navy, and they just increased their trade with the US and Latin America. And most of the nations in Europe actually resented this treaty to start with that. And also in 1805, whatever navy he had left was completely destroyed in the Battle of Trafalgar. One more time, great success for the English, and one more time defeat for him. His downfall, where things start to go bad for them, what is known as the Spanish ulcer, is Spain. Spain basically he tricks the Queen of Spain to come over and basically dethrones him and put again one of his siblings to be his older brother Joseph to be the ruler of Spain. And there was a lot of resistance in Spain to that, and Spain basically starts what is known as a guerrilla warfare. Guerrilla, by the way, is a Spanish word. Guerrilla doesn't mean like the animal gorilla. Guerrilla is Spanish, that means small, like small units fighting. So basically a creation of a guerrilla warfare starting in Spain, and France is reacting by putting the resistance very, very harshly. Most famous painting of that insurrection of the mass killing is Francisco Goya over here. His most famous painting, The 3rd of May, which illustrate French soldiers firing into the crowd. The focus, of course, here is on the person. It's kind of like lifting his hand, kind of creating an X shape, kind of like you can see his eyes kind of draw you into. And the soldiers, we do not see their faces. They're firing directly into the innocent person. This image has been used and reused throughout history, because this event, sadly enough, continues to happen many, many times in history, lining up and firing into a person. So the 3rd of May by Goya, kind of depicting this French atrocity that happened during that time. So Spain is the beginning of the downturn for Napoleon. And the end of Napoleon, of course, as we all know, is his campaign with Russia. Napoleon was very upset that he felt like that Emperor Alexander is not listening to the treaty that they had, and basically still working with England. So Napoleon basically decided that he is going to basically straighten Russia once and for all, and destroy them, and maybe break that Russia and create other nations. He really liked to go into every country and kind of reorganize. He went into Austria, kind of reorganized the Holy Roman Empire and broke it into several pieces. So he decided he's going to do the same thing into Russia. So he decided to build the biggest army in the history of France. Is like a creation of an army that included almost 600,000 men, not just the French soldiers, but soldiers from many other European nations. Anyone knows what is the thing that led to Napoleon being failure in Russia, the Russian campaign? What was the downfall of Napoleon in the Russian campaign? Snow. Very good. Very good. So the same thing that will bring Hitler down is the thing that is going to bring down Napoleon. Very, very big mistake. Same mistake that Hitler has created. See, you have to learn from history. Is Napoleon basically invaded Russia, and coming closer and closer to winter, he found out that Alexander and the Russians are not willing to fight him, and they keep on retreating and not giving him the battle that he was interested in it. And Napoleon usually and his soldiers usually lived on the land where they came. They didn't bring a lot of supplies with them. And the Russian decided to do a scourge, or if they decided to destroy and burn a lot of the land. So Napoleon could not find anything to feed himself. He finally got it, managed to get his big battle or get into Moscow, but the city just got burned, and there was nothing basically to take from that. So he had a big victory, but it was meaningless, and Moscow was burned, and Napoleon understood that he needed to retreat back. And from the original soldiers that started with him this campaign, around only 22,000 made it all the way back to France. And that's another example when Napoleon abandoned his troops and made it all the way back into France. So basically, he lost almost his entire army, made it back into France, and that's where the coalition finally had an opportunity to defeat Napoleon. There was nothing left for him to fight. So the Sixth Coalition basically organized against him, and in the Battle of Leipzig, he was defeated. And in 1814, he abdicated the throne, and that's where many people felt that was the end of Napoleon. And in his place, Louis XVIII, who's the brother of Louis XVI, became the king of France again. So the Bourbons were restored into power. Anyone knows who's Louis XVII? What happened to him? So we had Louis XVI. He was the king of France who got executed during the French Revolution. And now his brother Louis XVIII became the king of France. So who's Louis XVII? Anyone knows? So Louis XVII was the son of Louis XVI, the young king, but he died in jail from neglect. Louis XVI brother, Louis XVIII, who was really old in that stage, was restored into power. And became the king of France. He was very, very unpopular. They were really unhappy with the European nations coming over and reorganizing the situation and putting Louis XVIII into place. And they sent Napoleon into Elba, which is an island of Italy, as the exile. They finished. That was the end of his story. But Louis XVIII, and going back to the Bourbons, that was not really popular with the general population. Louis XVIII was I think he was in his late 50s, early 60s, and he was kind of going back to the old Bourbon system or trying to restore some Bourbon tradition. He was very, very pumped. There was a famous event when they had this big march, and he kind of fell on his back, and it was really, really embarrassing. He just slipped, but instead of getting up and trying to toss it all up, he was like, I got to stay on the ground. There's a special officer that his job is to come over and help me to get up. That's his duty. So I'm going to stay here until he gets here. It's like, dude, get up. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So Louis XVIII, to summarize, was not popular. And because he was not popular, Napoleon heard about that in Elba, so he basically decided to skip Elba town, and basically they put very little amount of guards on him, and he basically landed back in France with only less than 100 soldiers, and Louis sent the army to fight him. But as soon as the soldiers saw him, again, Napoleon missed the drama, of course. He comes over and opens his jacket. It's always with opening the jacket. And he said, soldiers, here's your emperor. If you want to kill me, just shoot me. It's always about, if you want to kill me, kill me. Everyone was like, no, instead of arresting him, they decide to join him and basically march back into Paris. And Louis XVIII, like a good Bourbon, packs his bag and basically runs out of town. And Napoleon basically is back in power. Napoleon understood basically there were barely any able Frenchmen in France. He had basically an army of a lot of young, basically teenagers. So he decided in order to be successful, he needs to go as fast as possible to defeat his enemies. So he needed to split the Prussian and the British. So he went as fast as possible and decided to go and attack before the British and the French will organize. And that leads us, of course, to the last major battle, and that's, of course, the Battle of Waterloo, which made the Duke of Wellington a household name for his success. Napoleon managed to actually fight the English and actually become very, very successful. He actually might have won the Battle of Waterloo, but bad luck for him. The Prussian actually showed to save the day. Two armies. Napoleon could have was actually on the verge of winning that battle, but he lost it and returned back to France. And last exile to Napoleon, he was finally shipped to St. Helena, which was like way in the middle of nowhere, basically between the Atlantic and the Pacific, all the way in the bottom. Like there's no escaping from that island. Once he got there, he kind of looked around. He was like, ugh, like he knew there's no more escape from this place. It was not a very good conditions to live in. So that's why he lived there for 6 more years and died in 1821, kind of wrote his memories. We have a lot of famous quotation, a lot of famous saying from Napoleon. Many of them come from during that time. We have a lot of his letters. And many, many years later, his body was returned to France in this elaborate ceremony. And they put him in this special like dome shape. And that's his basically his body was covered back in, which again, some people ask the question, like, why would they bring his body back? Like, you know, if he was like this, like supposedly horrible dictator. But some people said, you know, to some extent, maybe we were successful during his reign, or we had all these great victory, or the creation of a nationalistic mood all across France. So that basically, to sum up the end of our stream about Napoleon Bonaparte. So big takeaways, if you will, from the stream of Napoleon. He was to some extent ended the French Revolution, the ideals of like creating an equal, like a society with a government, like an elected representative government, more of like what you feel like more constitutional monarchy or democracy. It's basically back to dictatorship. But on the other hand, he codified some of the ideals of the French Revolution. Some might even say he's actually like an enlightened absolute. To some extent, he's intellectual, pursuing intellectual's idea, but in the end of the day, still a dictator. So before we get to Q&A, just remember to think Fiveable, follow Fiveable on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also check my website here, or a link to my book if you're interested in a little relaxation, Qigong for Beginners by me. Okay, so Q&A. Let's get into Q&A questions. Let's see if we get into big screen. Okay. Any questions in the end of our stream, some things that we might have pulled up? We have who's the most influential French person. We got Napoleon with 1 vote, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. What's the interesting thing about Rousseau? And by the way, and what's the connection between Rousseau and Bonaparte? Anyone know? Both of them were not born in France. And very interesting. So a lot of times they get picked in like, you know, who's the most famous French person, most influential French person, but they're both not born in France. It's like that famous joke, can you be the most famous person from France if you are not born in France? And the joke is Corsica. Of course you can. Of course you can. Of course you can. Get it like Corsica? Of course you can. What? Yes. Oh, yes. Of course you can. All right. Any other questions? So big takeaway also, if you most important point you got to remember about Napoleon, what he did in the global sense, he is spreading the ideals of the French Revolution. He's coming over, he's creating nationalistic sense in the countries that he is conquering. Okay, so he's bringing over to Germany's ideals of nationalism, also by being occupied by somebody who talks about nationalistic ideas that make certain people in Germany think, why are we under French control? What are these ideals? Maybe I am German too. So he's bringing the ideals of the revolution, but he's also stirring up nationalism inside these states. So the next stream after me next week with Mr. K, we're going to talk about the Congress of Vienna of 1815, how they tried to push the genie back into the bottle, trying to shove down like all of this French Revolution idea. But as you might know, like when you open a bottle of wine, or you're under it, if you're a student here, you're not supposed to know how to open a bottle of wine. But if you open a bottle of wine, you can put put the corkscrew back, but once you open it, like the idea is already spread out. It's going to be very, very hard to put it back after. So what was Charles V, a Bourbon? Yeah, so basically, it's interesting if we get to the 19th century to make it easy, the rulers are either Bourbon or Bonapartes. Later on, there's going to be Napoleon III also. So yeah, all the rulers in France afterwards, they're all either the Bourbons, are related to the Bourbon family, or Bonapartes. Okay, Napoleon III. For test purposes, Napoleon I, Napoleon III, Louis XVI. That's probably all you need to know. I don't think they're going to ask anything about Charles X or Louis XVIII or so forth. Any other questions? All right. And also remember, Napoleon is a great point if you're going to go for complexity, because he's a complex personality spreading ideals of the revolution, and on the other hand, still a full-blown dictator or enlightened absolute if you're going to go for that route. Thank you. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining in. Remember to keep on checking Fiveable. Mr. K is coming next week. I will have more future streams about Impressionism, also about the Russian Revolution in the beginning of March. So wishing you all, if you're starting the second semester, wishing you all a great second part of the semester, and good luck studying for the exam. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Good night.